Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. This is an incredible story about a serial killer that you and I had never heard of, and this is one of the investigators on that. Tim, what'd be super cool right now is me knowing how you are, and the listeners, they should also know. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Yes, very excited to introduce our guest today. It's Jim Rathmann. This one is extremely interesting because he is in a docuseries that's called Under the Radar, and it's about a Swedish serial killer named Peter Mangs. And Jim has an investigative role in the docuseries, and of course he is a criminal investigative consultant and who has a great background. And he contributes in this documentary in a wonderful way. And boy, I can't wait for our listeners to watch this docuseries.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. The lead on this is a documentary director and an investigative journalist. His name is John Mork. He's a Swedish gentleman, and he takes the helm on identifying and pursuing and trying to understand Peter Mangs. And it is an absolutely wild journey that this man goes on. And he's away from his family for weeks and weeks, just trying to piece this puzzle together. And Mangs isn't the serial killer that we typically hear about. The truck driver that's going across country, dropping bodies over state lines, and targeting people that have no family, etc. This is somebody who is using his white supremacist ideologies to justify his murders. And it's absolutely a psychological journey.
Yeah, it's a wild story because Peter Mangs was arrested for murder in Sweden back in 2010. And so he's in prison, but he spent a lot of time in Boca Raton, Florida before that time. And so that is the focus of the documentary, really, is like what murders in America could he have committed? And got to tell you, there's definitely a few very good candidates that were murders committed potentially by him. And so we get pretty deep into that with Jim Rathmann here today.
Yeah, and a very brazen serial killer as well. He taunts investigators with lyrics to songs that he wrote, original songs, pictures that may or may not be an area where he dropped a body. I mean, he does fit the stereotype of a serial killer in that way. Also in the way where he just thinks he's the smartest guy in the room as well, which is another one of those check boxes to check off. But again, really great interview, really great work that Jim and John did on this docuseries. Link will be in the show notes.
Yeah, it's from a company called Viaplay, and so you may have to Google Under the Radar and Viaplay because it streams on the Viaplay channels on like Apple TV and Amazon Prime and things like that. But it is available. But also there are a couple other documentaries with a very similar title, or really the same title. So hope you find the right one, and I think you're going to love it. And just a reminder, Missing Premium is back up and running on Apple Podcasts, so you can check it out on Apple and use your free trial. You get ad-free episodes, early releases, and our bonus show that everybody loves. Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate it. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Jim Rathmann. Welcome to the podcast, Jim Rathmann. How are you today?
Doing pretty good, guys. How are you?
We're doing fantastic. Wow, man. You and your team sent us these screeners of this amazing docuseries that really captivated Tim and I. One of the best that personally I've seen in a long, long time. But before we get to that, I think the audience will really be interested to know who you are, where you come from, what you do, just a little bit of background on you. Do you mind disclosing a bit?
Yeah, no, not at all, guys. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. I do appreciate it. My background, I worked local law enforcement, did everything from uniform patrol, SWAT. I did undercover narcotics for a little bit, and then from there got into detective division where I did high-risk felony-related cases, homicides. Ended up eventually making my way to the United States Secret Service. While in the Secret Service, I protected President Barack Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, who is obviously our current president, basically every number one and number two from all around the world. And so it was a good ride. And now I enjoy doing true crime for television and trying to bring whatever skill sets I have to help. My goal is really to help families get closure for cases they've never been able to get closure on.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we watched you as a part of this documentary called Under the Radar that is absolutely compelling. And we needed to talk to you about this case and about this documentary. And before we get too deep into that, why did you choose the project? How did it come about to you?
Actually, the project came to me. So this goes back now, I would say early summer of 2021. So I ended up getting a couple of emails. I was asked if I could join essentially a Zoom call where John Mark was on it and a few people from the production company and things like that. And so they told me what it was that they were working on, what John was working on. So essentially the way the story goes, John was given information from a clinical psychologist that was treating Peter Mangs in Sweden when he was locked up for his serial killings after being convicted. The information she gave to John was about, how Peter wrote songs. In these lyrics, he's admitting to a few homicides. Apparently, he confided in this clinical psychologist at one point or another. But, obviously she can't just go and give that out. So she became terminally ill. She gave that information to John, and when she passed away, John started working on that project. So he had called me and just kind of filled me in on what they had. They had a lot of the information from the Swedish authorities, from when Peter was arrested in Sweden, and really just wanted to go on the hunt to see, well, what cases did he act? What did he do in Florida? We realized during that time his father lived in Boca Raton, and he had some other relatives in the immediate area. And so we just started trying to peel it back the best that we could with the information we have, and see if we can solve it from the clues he left behind.
Now, you mentioned him. You mentioned Peter Mangs, and you mentioned Sweden. And when you say Sweden and serial killers, it just doesn't feel right, right?
Right.
I mean, you don't think about Sweden as being a hotbed for serial killers. Can you tell us a bit about Peter Mangs?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right, because when I first heard that, I'm like, Sweden, serial killer, like, what are you talking about? But, you never know. So we started looking into it. What I had learned about Peter, before he came, originally when he grew up there in Sweden, when he came to live with his father in Boca Raton, it was only after some falling out and some things going on back in Sweden where he grew up. But he came over as like a musician, vegetarian, just completely different. He was almost like, I would say, more or less like a hippie. He had longer hair, and just like his demeanor was different, but he was radicalized. And while he was living with his father, as you see in the show, the father had no problems showcasing the swastikas and various things of what he believed in. And so he essentially changed Peter's demeanor overall. So when Peter left to go back to Sweden, he wasn't the same person that showed up in the United States. And then he started going on doing the things that Peter eventually ended up doing. But he went from being okay with everyone to I hate everybody.
Yeah, and was that his birth father, that Rudolph, that he was living with for a period of time?
Yeah, so that is his birth father. When he and the biological mother split, I couldn't tell you, but the father, Rudolph, has been living in Boca Raton, Florida for quite some time. Going all the way back to the 90s. So he's been there for quite a while.
Wow. And how long was Peter living with him in Boca?
So Peter lived with him for a few years. I want to say it was around 3 years, maybe 4 years that he was there with him, and then went back to Sweden and then would make trips back and forth. What blew my mind when going through this whole entire process was how much the father and what the father knows and did nothing about it, like didn't report it to anybody, I mean, his son confided him in enough to admit to him back in 2003 about killing somebody in Sweden, and he didn't do anything about it. He had no problem helping him get lasers for firearms so he could, stuff that would be banned or you wouldn't be able to get, but he had no problem getting that stuff for him. He's like, oh, he belongs to a gun club. It's no problem. But wait a minute. You're getting him in these things, but you already know he's killed people in Sweden, and you've yet to do anything about it. It's almost like it's okay. It's acceptable. That really blew my mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't expecting to talk about that. And just a little bit of a spoiler here. This is something Tim and I were just talking about yesterday, where John Mork was speaking with Rudolph and says all of these things, and says you taught him how to hate these people, you trained him how to hate them, you trained him in weaponry, he's using your weapon, like you gave him guns. He told you he killed somebody, and now you're just sitting here and you're like, yeah, but I don't really know. I don't know anything beyond that. He might have just been making it up. It was insane. That moment in the show was absolutely crazy.
It really is. I mean, you got to think about it. If I had one of my kids called me and told me that, I mean, the first thing we're going to do is, one, we need to go to get you to a therapist immediately, because if you made that up, that's not normal ways of thinking. And also, if you did the crime, you have to do the time. Like, we can't. It's not acceptable, And so, as badly as I would never want to turn in my own kids, because that's probably going to be the defense of most people, but at the end of the day, you have to. You took a human life. Like, you have a moral obligation as a parent. But here it was like, well, maybe they'll build a statue of you. I don't even know if you guys hear that one yet, where they think he's going to get a statue for his killings.
Yeah.
Delusional.
Where would a statue be?
I agree. Somewhere in Sweden, because it was like they were trying to start their own little race war. That was what was in Peter's mind. Like, his killings are justified based off of their thought process and what they believe to be true. And it's really shocking and very disturbing.
Yeah. Can you describe the types of people that he was targeting? I think by now the listeners understand that this has a very white supremacist angle to it, but can you describe the types of people that he was targeting and how he justified that with his ideologies?
Right. So his ideology, so there's a few that he had, right? He didn't like people that were involved in the interracial relationships, right? Like, he didn't want to see that kind of mixture. He was against those of ethnicity or color. Jewish were also a part of that. So now you're talking the religion aspect of it. And then he ended up having a very big problem against drug dealers or people those involved with drugs, because he lost his sister at a young age because of drugs. And he's always held it out against the drug dealers that were supplying that. So if you really think about that in its full scope, it's like you pretty much hate everybody unless they like and believe in exactly what you believe in. Otherwise, everybody's on the opposite side. Because I mean, when you look at who he's killed overseas, it was opportunities. There were some robberies involved with that, taking their credit cards or their ATMs, making them use their ATM pins or give their ATM pins so he could withdraw the cash. Right. That suspect last name was Koros. And that was one of the ones he was convicted of in Sweden. And if you look at what happened in the United States, specifically related to the town center mall incidents, well, what was the same pattern with all three of those? Was crime of opportunity, heavy Jewish population, right? Town center mall is known for that, but a lot of people have money. And these victims were taken to various ATM machines to withdraw cash. So it fits for what happens here in the United States for what was happening in Sweden.
Okay, so just to back up a little bit to catch the listeners up, can you tell us what Peter has been convicted of and where, and what is outstanding as far as the Florida murders are concerned, and your work with John Mork?
So in Sweden, they convicted him of 4 murders. There were just crimes of opportunity. You had the robbery aspect of it. So they have him on about 15 murders in Sweden. But they were able to make sure we got him on these solid 4, because then he'll never be out on the street again. So that was the angle the Swedish authorities took. So he was arrested for that. In the United States, it's really undetermined because nothing has ever been solved officially, right? He's a suspect. It's a pattern of behavior. There's time frames you can kind of link him to be in and around during those times. And so it's kind of following that same method. So here in the United States, we know that he admitted to a double murder. We know that he had hinted towards doing other single individuals, right? He even wrote us a handwritten letter to John Mark because that was the big communication going on there. That handwritten letter, we took that information, found it, and that's what you see on the show too, where we brought the cadaver dogs. We brought the cadaver dogs in the event we get to that location, and sure enough, we found it. I grew up a mile away and had no idea that this abandoned house even existed. That's what makes it even crazier. And then the dogs alert. So, I think he isn't lying. I think he absolutely did some of these killings, and I think possibly the father even knows this information. But until it's proven in a court of law here in the United States, he technically hasn't been held up on anything here.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that house that was sort of abandoned and kind of like buried by, I guess, vegetation in the woods there. How was the production led to that house?
So originally, it wasn't even anything because we knew nothing of it until we got the letter. We got the letter. John calls me and says, hey, he gave me this description. And I'm thinking about it and I'm going, wow, I literally grew up there. So when I grew up in Boca Raton, and I went to Boca Raton High School, by the way, the area that he's talking about is, and for those that are listening in Boca Raton, it's Spanish River Boulevard and A1A. So that is a drawbridge that you have to go over to get over the intercoastal that puts you right at the beach, basically. And you only have two options. You either go right, which will take you south, or you go north, and it runs along that beach, okay? If you were to go right, you literally go 1.1 miles, and that's where I grew up. That's where I went to high school. I lived right in an apartment complex off to the right. Where this was is that if you go to the left off of Spanish River Boulevard and A1A, it wasn't too far up on your right-hand side. He described it to a T. So when we got out there, we're like, wow, it's pretty thick. So John actually went and did the whole bunch of walking. You had to take this up. It was just very, very thick vegetation, but there was this wall. And so we kind of climbed up on this wall and he could look over, and sure enough, there's the abandoned house he's talking about. So at that point, we decided to only get a canine dog, right? Those are legit certified. It's Peace River Canine. That's what they're used all around the world. Like when you had I think in Miami, they had the building collapse that happened, a year or two ago. They used the dogs for that. They've used them in Haiti. They've used them all kinds of places for national disasters and so on where they can find human remains. These dogs are certified and they're very, very good. So I called them up. They met us. We decided we were going to go walk through back there, see it. It caught me completely by surprise when the dogs started alerting. And once the dogs alert, it's not like they're going to alert on a deceased animal or something else. They are only trained on the senses of human remains. And so I want to say there's like 26 scents that they're trained on or something like that. So it's very specific. The fact that they alerted and sat down, I knew at that point we need to stop what we're doing. Let's back all the way out and let's let Palm Beach County know and let them come out here and figure this out, because there are human remains that they're hitting on. And I've heard some people say, what if it's an old, Indian burial ground? Yeah, it's possible, but you're talking a long, long time ago that's been under there. So it doesn't seem likely. So for the fact that these dogs hit, it really caught us off guard.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing moment. And, if it was any sort of burial ground, we've worked with cadaver dogs as well, scent dogs, in other cases that we've been a part of. And we got a huge education from the women who ran this organization. But she explained it like if someone had sprayed perfume in the air, and the way you smell perfume in the air is the way a dog would would smell human remains in a burial ground where it's sort of everywhere,
Right.
but when they sit down and they're alerting, it's very specific. So if it was like a burial ground, it's more like the behavior as they're walking and not so like triangulated to one spot. And when that dog sat down, and I mean, chills, you get chills when you watch that part.
Absolutely. So we went over to the sheriff's office, gave him all that. We have no problem giving the video of every single step we took inside of there. That through John and myself, and there's also a retired FBI agent that was there with us named Tom Myers. And we were just like, wow, we got to be kidding me right now. Like, this legitimately happened. We followed the letter to a T and we hit it. And it was like, what have we got? What did we stumble upon here? And, then it obviously makes you wonder. There's a family out there that would love some closure, and they rightfully deserve that closure on whatever is underneath that, whatever is buried out there.
Right. And so you spoke with Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in regards to that hit. Have they searched the area yet?
So it's a great question. To be completely honest with you, I don't know if they actually searched it or not. And the reason I say that is when we went and brought that information to them, it was literally the very next day that we showed up there to give them that information about the canine hit. So we show up out there, we kind of outlined it on a map, let them know what we had, gave them the dog certification so they know that this isn't a hoax. We did all those things. So we agreed to meet. So if you're in from that area on Spanish River Boulevard and Federal Highway, that's where you would make that right to go over that drawbridge that I explained earlier. There was it's either a Walgreens or a CVS on that corner. So that was the meeting location. We were prepared to take them up there, walk them back, because you have to go through that thick vegetation. It's not fun, but you have to get through that in order to get to where this location is. I mean, you guys could see how thick that vegetation was back there. So we were completely prepared to do that. What caught us off guard was whoever that supervisor sergeant was came up and ensured that we turned off all cameras, all mics, gave us a talking to, and then made us stay there while they left, and even left somebody to make sure we didn't leave the parking lot, where they went to the location and then came back just a short time later saying they didn't find anything. So to say if they ever actually searched it, I wouldn't know, but why wouldn't you want us to go there if we literally were the ones that brought you to there and brought this information to you, have the canine dogs there if needed, all the resources. So why wouldn't we be able to come with you? I'm not saying they didn't do it, but if you didn't go back far enough and go through that thick vegetation, you're probably not going to get it to that spot. So my personal feeling and belief is that it was never searched. And if they did search it, maybe they went in 5 yards, 10 yards and said, we're out of here. We can check the box on this. But we were much further back than 5 or 10 yards, that I can assure you. But we were not allowed in any way, shape, or form, which was very unusual because I've worked with, canine dogs and law enforcement in the past, and they could care less if we're out there watching them. They want the information because they want to know what's, what is out there. But for us to be held at bay and not allowed until they were finished, that to me just was very unusual. It's not like you're giving away techniques or how to canine bomb dogs or and the techniques they use to dispose of bombs or IEDs. None of that information. Wait a minute, this is a canine dog. It's a canine cadaver dog. They sniff. I mean, there's no secret to it.
Yeah, it is interesting that they kept you so far away and not at least present in the vicinity of the search, right? I mean, it was like you couldn't even have eyeballs on it. That's interesting.
Correct. We couldn't have eyeballs on it. We were probably, I think when you leave that Walgreens, it's probably a little over a mile away because you got to go over that drawbridge, get to A1A, and then you got to turn left and go north just a little bit. So yeah, I mean, we weren't even allowed to get close enough. They made sure we didn't leave that spot. So to me, that was very unusual. Not typical of how you handle that on a professional law enforcement level.
And how many murders is Peter suspected of committing in the United States?
So that we don't really know. We know that through the clinical psychologist, he admitted to a double murder. So there's two. But in his other songs, he admits to or hints towards at least one or two more. So you're looking at three, possibly four. And he's still writing letters to John today. And again, it's his own sick, twisted little way of a cat and a mouse game, dangle a carrot, go chase it, I'll give you a little more. At the end of the day, Peter wants to be caught, but he wants you to work for it. But he also is enjoying the fact that he feels he's the smartest person in the room. And so he's kind of using that. But like most serial killers, especially Peter, if he wanted a statue, then he wants to be known. He wants to be glorified. He wants all of this. I just wish I could get a chance to sit down and talk with him. And if not me, I certainly wish some of the best interrogators with the FBI would be able to sit down and talk to him to figure out what it is that he did do here in the United States and get that information. I mean, if he wants to be the most famous serial killer, sure, we'll help you get on every publication in the world once you tell us what all you did so we can go get closure for these families.
Yeah, well said. I mean, because it does come down to closure. And you did say that Peter wants to be the smartest person in the room, and that's like really frustrating when you have families who are just like struggling to get answers, and you have this one person who's toying with people. And I'm really curious what your thoughts are in his psychology, because he was a very effective killer, and in a sense, in a way, he deserves credit for achieving something to that level. And it's awful that it's murder, but he kind of failed at everything else in his life. And he was using things like writing a song with all of these clues in there. Can you get into the ways that he became this like cat and mouse taunting, very, very effective killer?
Yeah, most like if you look back at serial killers in history, right? You have the BTK killer, right? He left his little signature, his little BTK, and then he would keep some sort of item from the victims, right? Like that's how he got caught, and then he left the car that had BTK, left the driver's license, little things like that, right? So they always have some sort of way of remembering the moment, which is what it was so captivating when we got access to the photos he had on his computer, because it was like he was doing the same type of things. So when you take that and you look at what Peter was doing, his way of, because he was a professional musician, well, I'm going to write songs, and then I'm going to leave little clues within the songs to make you wonder, right? So that was his kind of way of doing that. And so again, he thinks he's the smartest person out there. I don't think he was betting on the fact that as he's writing and doing these things, we're out here actually trying to find it. For Peter, he was a master of disguise. He was good at doing that. He did a lot of, I would say, research on how to stalk people or how to evade, how to not get captured. Those are some of the things he was doing, because he did it for quite some time before he got nailed. But for me, the only thing I think about when he's thinking of that and he's doing all these crimes and he's committing all these murders, I don't think he ever thought he would get caught. He thought he was smart enough to constantly get away with it. And it only takes one little mistake to slip up for the whole entire thing to cave in on him. But here, he's never been caught for anything in the United States, so that's why he's teasing towards what he's done in the United States, because his goose is cooked in Sweden, right? So here it is in the U.S. Let me just keep throwing this out there, because I haven't been caught on that yet, so therefore I don't think they're going to catch me.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Can you tell us about Randy Gorenberg's murder at the mall? And was this the case where the killer was driving a Chrysler 300? So
Randy Gorenberg would have been the first victim from the town center mall that we know of. So it happened in three, and they do think all three are related. So that would have been March 23rd of 2007. Randy Gorenberg goes to the town center mall. She purchased a music CD, I believe it was, did a little bit of shopping. She leaves, and all of a sudden, next thing we know, her body is dumped in a park in Boca Raton, Delray, that kind of like right in between those city limits there. There was a bank right behind where her body was dumped or in close proximity. And then they got the surveillance video of her vehicle along with a Chrysler 300 following closely behind. So that's where the Chrysler 300, that's what law enforcement put out in 2007. So what we did, now we have, Peter had 4 passports and he used 4 passports. Some of the information we have has Peter leaving the United States March 13th. Some of the information has him leaving March 27th. Even law enforcement has it either March 13th or March 23rd. So realistically, it's kind of a little bit of a mystery as to what. You know, you have Border Patrol or Customs and Border Protection giving specific dates, but remember he had 4 passports. So which one is it? It's all within that time frame. So with Peter, that it would have fit a little bit of that methodology that he was using in Sweden because of the ATM, because of the, passcodes or the pins to get money, and then ends up murdering and then driving off. That was the first one. The second one, or unless you want to continue talking about Randy Gorenberg.
Well, I'm just curious about the car, right? That car, if Peter committed that murder, is it true that he would have been on a test drive at that time?
So I believe the test drive in his diaries was actually from 2009, when he's talking about test driving a white Chrysler 300. What was interesting in that is because that's what made me think about, wait a minute, he's talking about test driving a white Chrysler 300. He's hinted towards having that, and then the only suspect vehicle they have in Gorenberg is a white Chrysler 300. So what I did is some checks where I could. I'm going to keep it consistent with the television show that there's a relative in the area that's not Rudolph that owns Chrysler 300s or has owned Chrysler 300s. Also was able to do a lot of work on Chryslers and GMs as a profession, going all the way back to 2004. So it's not like it's not a comparable link there. So that's what triggered it. And when I did more digging and saw that the relative owned white Chrysler 300, it was almost like, wow, did we literally just stumble on exactly what this is? Because unsolved case, you have 3 victims, or 4 victims from Town Center Mall, but 3 cases. All of them, you're never able to link a suspect to it. You have no DNA. You have no, as far as I know, a match with fingerprints or anything else. And you start thinking, could it be that because he's international is why he wouldn't be in the databases for APHIS, which is your fingerprints, or CODIS, or various databases they use for DNA linking and things like that? That would be a very good reason as to why you couldn't link him, going all the way back to 2007.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you were about to go into the other victims, and you said 4 victims with 3 scenes. Can you go into the other ones?
Correct. So the second one would have been Jane Doe. Although I know at some point or another, Jane Doe, I think they kept that name the same in the public, had some sort of media thing back. I want to say go back to 2009 or 2010. But Jane Doe, so again, Town Center Mall, right? Very heavy. Boca Raton itself is very populated with, it's a big Jewish community. There's a lot of money, a lot of wealth through that area. So it's a really good breeding ground for somebody that wants to target that type, as Peter would. Jane Doe is leaving the mall. She puts her 2-year-old child in the back seat, walks around to get into the driver's seat. By the time she jumps into the driver's seat, someone slips into the back of her vehicle, holds her at gunpoint, and made her start driving around to various ATM machines. Now, they went to multiple. They even got on the Florida Turnpike. I think they went towards Coral Springs, which would be south, kind of like Broward County, Fort Lauderdale area, and worked their way back up to Boca Raton, and then went back to the mall. So after numerous ATM withdrawals, ended up, from my understanding, there was zip ties used, right? FlexiCuff zip ties. She was even zip tied to the inside the car. So I think her hands, and it may have been her neck, something like that. And he took her driver's license and literally told her, if you tell anybody who I am, I will come back and I will kill you and your family. Well, I mean, I can only imagine what she just went through at that point. So, believe it or not, the first responder that showed up on that, the first police officer was Ross Magadoff, who I happened to have grown up with his older brother. So I knew Ross. I actually used to tie Ross's shoes before we go play outside at the park. Like, that's how far back I go with this kid. So Ross, working for Boca PD, happened to be patrolling the town center mall at the exact time that this 911 call came out. So he responded in less than 50 seconds. The initial report that Jane Doe gave was the complete opposite of whoever the suspect was, because of the fear he's going to come back and kill me and my family. So when they put out there what they refer to as a bolo, be on the lookout for, was all the wrong information. It wasn't until a few days later that she came back in and gave detailed information, which is where the composite sketch comes from, the suspect sketch that's where that came from. But my understanding from Ross was that the detectives and law enforcement did not initially believe her story. And it wasn't until the Boquicchio several months later where the same thing happened, except this time it resulted in a double homicide of a mother and a daughter, zip-tied, executed, ATM withdrawals. It was the same essential pattern, except this one didn't have an ending where they were able to escape. And that's where the link ended up finally coming together. But I get it with the Jane Doe. It seemed like a crazy, wild story at first until the Boquicchios happened.
Yeah, I mean, it is a crazy story. That's really adding tragedy, though, that they may not have believed her at first. That's insane. But I can understand how it sounds like such a wild story.
Well, it is, and then unfortunately, in law enforcement and to Boca Raton PD's defense, because I can say this for just about every department, you do have people that make up wild and kooky stories at time where they, will make official police reports and have you out there basically chasing your own tail for something that never existed. And so I can understand, because it would have come in so wild. She gave all the wrong information at first. She didn't do herself any favors by doing that, but then she was very consistent when she did come forward. And they have never been able to link or even find anybody close to that sketch until, lo and behold, Peter Mangs.
Yeah, the sketch definitely looks like Peter.
Well, in 2007, Peter also had a ponytail, which made it even crazier.
Yeah, and in the sketch, right, there's a little bit of a ponytail in the back?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's like hat and glasses, and that was what Peter could have used as a slight disguise, I suppose.
Correct. He was a master of disguise. Like in Sweden, when they raided his place, when they put him under arrest and they did their search warrants, he had all kinds of disguises. He had wigs, he had long hair, short hair, puffy hair, multiple sunglasses, hats. Anything that he wanted to do in order to disguise himself, he was doing that. So there's no reason to believe that in 2007 he wasn't doing the same thing in Boca Raton.
Didn't he have like fake eyebrows too, like bushy eyebrows?
He did. He had fake eyebrows. He was able to really change his entire appearance.
Yeah.
It was almost like watching a Jason Bourne movie or something.
And what's really additionally creepy about his appearance is that when he has, his hair, when his head is shaved and he doesn't have any facial hair and, you don't see him with sunglasses, he does look like a blank canvas. He has like the perfect face to apply a disguise to.
Correct. I would agree with that.
I wonder if that was something that his dad like instilled in him, like you have to, I'm sure it was, right? Like you have to figure out a way where you just throw things off a little bit. This guy has bushy eyebrows. That's such a small detail.
It is, and the fact that the father was so interested in protecting his son, right, and not even telling Swedish authorities, hey, he just admitted, and even after it was confirmed that his son had killed somebody, because it's not like he couldn't read that or research that. Knowing that it happened and you're still covering him up, it's like, to what extent did you help in the process? Who's to say, and again, complete speculation here, but who's to say the father didn't help with what happened in Boca Raton or help, provide weapons or dispose of. I'm not saying by any means that it happened. I'm just saying you could theorize that it could be. Why not? You knew in 2003, 4 years before anything happened at the Town Center Mall, and you were perfectly acceptable and okay with the fact that your son called you and admitted to killing somebody, and you did absolutely nothing about it. But like, well, good job. Yes, let me help you get you some lasers for some more weapons. And to me, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, his dad complimented his work ethic, for God's sake. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And so, who's to sit there and say that he wasn't assisting or knows a lot more information into what he was involved with in Boca Raton? I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he knew what had happened and just totally isn't coming forth with that information here either.
I do remember seeing something on the news, I guess, and I didn't remember it until I watched the docuseries about these like racial upheavals that were happening in Sweden. And when I saw the news footage on the docuseries, I vaguely remember like seeing something or hearing something about that back when it happened. But the way Peter operated as a serial killer, on top of using his white supremacist ideologies and manipulating the media, was so like wild to me, because I was reflecting on that moment where I was kind of, again, vaguely remembering hearing about this, but there was no mention of a serial killer. So the title is so appropriate. So under the radar, he was exacting this plot to raise the white, the white race and kill everybody else, but also manipulating the media in like creating these little firestorms where the news was about racial upheaval. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I find it all to be very interesting, but I think it allowed him to kind of operate under the radar. That was his whole entire key, in using some of the things that are going on and some of the things going on in his own country as a way to plan out his attacks, but also essentially stay under the radar. Like, there's 1,000 people out here at this protest. You know what I mean? And like, or this violent protest that's going on, and therefore he could kind of do what he needs to do. Is like, you've got 1,000 people to choose from. You're not going to figure out that it's me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Everybody else is waving the banners and torches. He's just cruising along and doing the dirty work.
Correct.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So Peter had a diary that he kept, as well as photographs. How helpful was that in sort of rehashing his time in Boca?
Well, it was definitely helpful, because we got that from the Swedish authorities. So when I first got a hold of it and started looking through it, because I'm from down there, I can recognize the photos and I can understand where he's at based on what he's writing. What threw me for a loop, and I want people to understand, when it comes to the very first possible homicide that we list, and that victim's name was Christine K. And that was the one that had to do with Gilbert's Resort going into Key Largo or down to the Keys. When I saw the photo that was on his, they had off his computer, you recognize that drive because of the walls. Like, that's the only way to get down there to and from. So it was immediately recognizable. But then having a picture of Gilbert's Resort from on top of the bridge, and then also having a picture of the exit you would take to get to Gilbert's Resort, to me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, because I've been down there a lot of times in my life, and I've never once cared about pulling off and going to Gilbert's Resort, because I want to go all the way down to the Keys. Like, I just didn't care. But here's a person that's taking the time to take pictures of it. So start looking into missing people, and in 2009, Christine K comes up. But what's weird about it, and I don't feel like we highlighted this well enough in the show, was Christine K resided less than 2 miles from Peter's father. That's the weird part. And now he's got these photos, and lo and behold, this lady who resided less than 2 miles from Peter's father ends up washing up in the mangroves in Key Largo in and around the time that we have him in the state of Florida. So it was like, is it a clue you're leaving behind? Is this your way? Was the photos from the bridge and of Gilbert's Resort and the exit? Is that something that you did to memorize what had taken place? Don't know. But the fact that Christine K lived less than 2 miles from where Peter's father did, all the way up in Boca Raton, I mean, that's an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute drive south. Very odd.
Is that something that you think he would do? Take. It sounds like, I know one of those photos was like off the bridge, but the other one was of the exit. Like, that sounds like a photo that you wouldn't really need to take. And then the way that Christine was found, at least, is quite different than some of the other murders from the mall in Boca that he is suspected of. Is that also something that he would do, a killer like this?
Well, we don't know what Christine K was doing at the time. We know that she had some drug-related issues. Did Peter see, if it were to be Peter, let me just specify that, but if he was doing this, was Christine K with somebody else? Was she with the drug dealer at the time? What was his interaction with her? But what the similarity is that makes it odd was, like, when Peter killed Koros in Sweden, he completely covered up his face before doing it, and then making sure, because he didn't want to look at it. When Christine K was found in the mangroves, same thing. Her face and everything else was completely covered up. So could it be for the same reasons? And then when we talk about that exit picture to get to Gilbert's Resort, if you go off on that exit, you have to take that roadway probably maybe a quarter of a mile, and then it wraps around to the right and it'll take you to the resort. But right at that turn where you make that right, you could walk down, and we actually go down it during the show. You go down about 20, 30 feet, and there's this concrete pad that's supporting some of the bridge, and you could take there is not one street light that's at that spot, not one. You can go in complete darkness, put somebody down there in the water. It has a flowing current. Let the current just take the body wherever it's going to go. Whether you put it in a bag, weight it down, it can move that current and end up in the mangroves in a short time frame. So that was the thought process in that, because of how easy it could have been. If it was that easy for us in 2021, it had to be just as easy in 2009 for that. So that was the thought process behind that one.
I'm just curious about law enforcement's mentality when it comes to coincidences, because you mentioned the 2 mile thing, and then throughout the series, you see all of these other factors that would be, I guess, circumstantial or coincidental. When, in your mind as law enforcement, do you say this is no longer a coincidence? The father is 2 miles away from this victim. Peter's in town at the time. Everything's lining up. Is there like a switch that is like internal that sort of goes off for you when you're like, this can't be a coincidence?
So for me, when I used to do this job, I've always wanted to have something concrete, something that I can work on, that's tangible, that gives me a good reason to go and talk and find out. But honestly, the most difficult cases to solve are ones that you have to piece together piece by piece. So it might start with what's a coincidence. It might start off of a hunch. It might start off of a word that was said by somebody else that at the time is completely circumstantial. But you have to build the case enough to where it's no longer circumstantial. This is now evidence. And whether it's digital evidence, whether it's physical evidence, whatever that evidence is, and now you ratchet it up another step. So I can certainly understand the scrutiny from a documentary starting in Sweden, right, with John, connecting me, and we're giving him this info. But more specifically, everything that we had, that we worked on, especially to do with town center mall incidents, we gave that information not only to Boca PD, but to the sheriff's office. And you can kind of see how Palm Beach County treated us. They treated us more like we're just media that's just out here on this wild goose chase. But really, we're trying to help. And in 17 years, I haven't had squat on any of these cases, especially with the Boca Raton Mall wars. They had nothing with it. And here we're bringing them something. And then to know that there's also somebody besides Rudolph that still lives in that area and always has. And I'm not sitting here saying that they had something to do with it. But there is enough information there to at least go and track down your only survivor, which is Jane Doe, and present a photo lineup. That's what I would have done, because as long as your victim can say, hey, you know what? That person right there, I believe that was the person. That is more than enough to go ahead and now advance your case. Probable cause is 50% plus one, right? So 51% we might be right, 49 we're wrong, but that 51% is all I need now to further my investigation. And that would have been the first thing that I did regardless, because there's a lot of discrepancies. Are the timelines matching up? Are they not matching up? I get that. But you're also dealing with Swedish authorities. You're also dealing with 4 different passports. But there's enough information there to go, well, wait a minute, it kind of makes sense. Not in the DNA database. The fingerprints wouldn't be in the database. There is somebody that still lives down in that area. The father covering up like crazy. That to me seems a heck of a lot of reasons to go and investigate that further, but then get a photo lineup and present it to your Jane Doe. And if the Jane Doe says, yeah, you know what, that's it. Now you can just kickstart everything you want. Interpol, if that's what it takes, or investigate further locally. But it gives you a new arm to now escalate your investigative skills and levels. But you can't go on to it of like, oh, they're just TV people. They're just trying to sensationalize it. That doesn't solve crimes. Here's a perfect example. If I can get into this, crowdsourcing. Have you guys ever heard of crowdsourcing?
Yeah, of course.
With the access now to internet, right? You can reach so many more people than you used to a long time ago. Look at where we are technology-wise in 2024 as opposed to where we were in 2007. So you might be able to reach somebody that saw something suspicious that day, knew something, didn't want to come forward. 17 years has gone by. Somebody might say, hey, you know what? I knew this information back then. I didn't say anything because I thought I could get in trouble. And now I have my own family and my own kids. I had a change of heart. I want to come forward. That's what you hope for. So when you crowdsource, you're now getting everybody in the masses to start coming forward with new information. And I hope that Palm Beach County gets new info or Boca PD gets new info, because these families need closure. The Boquiquios need closure. Jane Doe needs closure on who the suspect was that did this to her and her child, and Gorenberg. They absolutely need that closure, and I hope they get it. But crowdsourcing and bringing people in and bringing that information to light, there's a lot that you can do. You can't just put your blinders on and be like, oh, they're just TV people. We're just going to treat them like we would any media person and just ignore what they have to say. That is not how you solve 17-year-old cases. You have to be open to new ideas and new ways.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see you and John Mork work together on this, and he really puts everything that he's got into this. And it's not just a television thing. Like, you can tell when you're watching other docuseries and the producer has fed lines to the individual. You can tell that that's really not the case here. Can you describe your relationship with him and your opinion of his work ethic and how he's gone about this?
I got to become very close friends with John over the last few years. We still communicate all the time. We're still updating on red letters that Peter's sending of most recent. John's heart is in the right place. He was very good friends with the clinical psychologist that gave him this information on there. John has worked on many other projects. This isn't one that he had to take. It was good. He was interested. He became very much involved in what had happened and, wanted to bring this out as to what else has Peter done? We know that he's killed some people over here. Let's find out, and so John was very much dedicated, very, very hardworking, but he was honest. I mean, he spent months away from his own family to try to put this together, to spend time here in the United States, to connect. How does it work here in the U.S., to really bring closure to families? He's extremely passionate, much like I am. Now, I will say this, and he and I are fully in agreement on this. Whether our information that we bring solves it, we hope it would. If it doesn't, so be it. But if it brings information that does get this case solved, that's what matters most to us, is closure for families. Somebody has to work for these families to bring them that closure. And, John and I are very, very, very passionate about that. To work with him and to get to know him and to become friends like we are, it's been a great experience.
The end of the docuseries left with a bit of a cliffhanger there as there's a to be continued card. Are there going to be more episodes?
Well, we certainly are trying to do that now. The reason it took so long for this to come to the United States, we spent a lot of time working with the Swedish authorities, trying to figure out how we can interview Peter in prison. And we were told so many times it's going to happen. They give us a date, we gear up for it. And then right before it would happen, either Peter would get in trouble and he can no longer do the interview from prison, or, somebody would want, to be compensated to have an interview, things such as that. So we're never able to sit down and have that interview. It got to the point where we had to go through Peter's attorney to try to get a statement from Peter or to figure it out. We had to at some point. We couldn't just stay where we were. Since all that has happened, obviously Peter knows what we're doing. You would think that he would stop and cut off communication, but he hasn't. He was pissed, but aside from being pissed, he can continue right on of giving more and more clues. So we're not stopping in what we're doing. I am determined to find the missing link, to figure out what it is that he did here in the United States. If we're right on this, on the Boca Raton malls, we hope we are. We can bring closure to those families, but we're continuing to work that. And I'm hoping anyone out there that listens to this, if they don't feel comfortable going to local law enforcement, they can give it to me, and I'll be more than happy to give every bit of information to local law enforcement to help them bring closure for these families. I have a website, Jim Rathmann, thecompany.com. There you can submit it right through there. I am not law enforcement anymore. You don't have to get in any trouble giving it to me. But whatever you give to me, I can 100,000% give it to law enforcement. What they choose to do with it is out of my hands at that point. But I would like nothing more than for Jane Doe, the Gornbergs, and the Boquiquios to have closure of this absolute nightmare that they have experienced for so many years. And I pray that their family can get the closure that they rightfully deserve so they can go on to the next chapters of their life.
Well said. And you mentioned your website, which is an amazing name, Jim Rathmann, thecompany.com. Great name for a website. Super easy to remember. We'll also have that in the show notes. And for anyone who's asking themselves how they can watch Under the Radar, where do you direct people?
So it's on 3 different platforms. You can get it. Viaplay is the streaming service that's new to the U.S. market. You can access it through Prime Video, Roku, or Xfinity, and it's just an add-on subscription. They just go on there, fill out for their trial, and they can enjoy the show. It's about 3 hours long, and we work long and hard on it, and hopefully it brings something. I'm hoping it'll trigger the right person to remember something, to put that missing piece or whatever the final touch is on this, so we can bring this entire case to closure and bring that family the justice they need.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for your time here today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me. If you ever want me to come back, just let me know.